She opened her front door to the sound of engines and froze. Her quiet street was overflowing with uniformed veterans, nurses, bikers, and strangers holding flags and flowers. At the front stood the homeless man she gave a blanket to, now clean-shaven, holding a folded American flag. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The wind cut like razors as it swept through the narrow alleyways of South Philadelphia, scraping past brick walls and shuttered storefronts. Emily Dawson's breath rose in clouds, sharp and fast, as she kept her head down against the cold. Her hospital ID badge still dangled from her coat zipper, forgotten after another 12-hour shift filled with broken wrists, broken promises, and the slow, quiet breaking of people's spirits. She could still hear the cries of the last patient, a 6-year-old with a shattered collarbone and no insurance. It stayed with her like so many others. She crossed the street near the liquor store, its neon sign flickering like a weak heartbeat. The scent of stale beer and salt from the icy roads filled her nostrils, and she was about to pull her scarf higher when she noticed the figure on the bench. He was curled into himself, as if trying to disappear. A blanket of frost had formed on the fabric of his torn army jacket, clinging to the worn seams like a second skin. People passed him without a glance. A man in a tailored coat stepped wide to avoid him. A teenager laughed into her phone, eyes never even registering the human shape on the bench. A woman, older, pulled her purse tighter and muttered under her breath, "They choose that life." That was the moment Emily stopped. She didn't hesitate, didn't weigh risk or optics or what people might think. Her instinct moved faster than thought. She stepped toward him, his eyes lifted, slow, bloodshot, full of that terrible mixture of hope and disbelief. His lips trembled, and his voice cracked from the cold. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to get warm." Up close, he was everything society had trained her to fear, unwashed, unshaven, and forgotten. But Emily didn't see a threat. She saw something most people missed entirely: the inked outline of a Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor on the left side of his neck, weathered but unmistakable. Not just a veteran, one of ours. "You served?" she asked, her voice a blend of empathy and reverence. "Fallujah," he croaked. "Then life just forgot me." Emily said nothing else. She pulled her fleece blanket from her bag, the one she always brought for the late shifts when the hospital's heating sputtered out. Without a word, she draped it over his shoulders. He tried to stop her, reaching weakly with gloved fingers full of holes, but she silenced him with a look, firm, kind, unwavering. Then she unscrewed her thermos and handed him the last of her tea. Steam curled into the night as he took it with shaking hands. "Stay warm," she said softly. "I'll be back tomorrow." Before he could speak, before she could let the tears stinging her own eyes fall, she turned and walked into the dark. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the beige walls of the hospital's administrative wing. Emily sat across from the director's desk, her badge now lying face down on the lacquered wood, its clipped lanyard coiled like a snake beside it. The silence in the room was clinical. No hum of monitors, no call buttons, no human pain to treat. Just the hum of bureaucracy preparing to do what it always does, protect itself. Across from her, Linda Voss, the hospital administrator, adjusted the cuffs of her blazer like she was about to present a legal case, not deliver a moral verdict. Her voice was practiced, firm, devoid of warmth. She didn't meet Emily's eyes at first. Instead, she slid a printed photograph across the desk with two manicured fingers. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Emily, hunched over the homeless man, blanket in her hands. The moment had been frozen, stripped of all its context and humanity, reduced to an accusation. "We received this photo this morning," Voss began, her tone clipped. "You are clearly distributing hospital-issued supplies to unauthorized individuals." Emily stared at the photo without touching it. She didn't need to look twice. She remembered every second of that night. "That's theft of hospital property," Voss continued, enunciating each syllable like she was reading from a policy manual. "You can either submit a written apology and accept a 3-week suspension, or face immediate termination." Emily finally looked up, her voice low but steady. "I'm not writing anything." "Emily," Voss leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice to something that almost resembled concern. "I understand your intentions, but that's not the point. Rules are rules. We can't—" "No," Emily interrupted, sharper now. "You can't. I did, and I'd do it again." The director blinked, caught off guard by the certainty in Emily's voice. There was no outrage in her tone, no plea for mercy, just resolve. "You're leaving me no choice," Voss said quietly. "You never had one to begin with," Emily replied, standing. By late afternoon, her locker was empty. Her badge was turned in. No one stopped her on the way out. Not the charge nurse who used to trade night shifts with her. Not the resident she once trained through his first trauma code. Word had already traveled, and silence had already answered. She stepped out into the cold again, same as the night before, the city humming with indifference around her. But this time, she wasn't just tired, she was exiled. And yet, there was no regret pressing against her ribs, only the memory of a man who had nothing but a worn-out jacket and a cracked voice saying, "I'm just trying to get warm." She didn't tell her friends, didn't want the hollow kindness of texts or sympathy dinners. Some things weren't for sharing. But across town, someone else had been watching. Someone with a memory as sharp as her instinct. And his hands were no longer shaking. The alley behind the liquor store smelled like wet cardboard and old regret. Samuel Briggs stirred from sleep beneath the fleece blanket Emily had given him, the first clean, warm thing that had touched his body in weeks. He clutched it tightly to his chest, as if it were the last scrap of dignity left in the world. The dawn was gray and unforgiving, the kind that made shadows stretch longer than they should, like ghosts trailing behind the living. He sat up slowly, muscles groaning under the weight of age, trauma, and cold. The corner of a crushed energy drink jabbed his hip through the layers of newspaper he'd used as insulation. But he ignored it. His mind wasn't on the cold today. It was on her. He hadn't seen kindness like that in years. Not since the war. Not since him. Briggs reached into the inside pocket of his coat, the same one he'd stitched shut with fishing line 3 winters ago. His fingers found the battered flip phone, an old relic, prepaid, cracked across the front. He charged it once a week at the soup kitchen when no one was looking. There was only one number saved in it. He hadn't dialed it in 12 years. He stared at the phone, thumb hovering. His breath hitched. Then he pressed call. On the other side of the country, in a quiet Washington, D.C. office, Congressman Robert Langston answered on the first ring. Sam? There was a pause. Briggs's voice came in brittle and small. A nurse gave me her blanket last night, real one, clean, looked me in the eye like I wasn't trash, told me she'd come back, and now she's out of a job. Langston didn't ask how he knew, didn't question the detail. Where are you? He asked instead. An hour later, Briggs gave the name, Emily Dawson. And by sunrise, Langston's team had her name, her story, and that now infamous photo in their hands. He posted it at 7:42 a.m. She didn't ask for a thank you. She just did the right thing and got punished for it. This is who we've become. Let's talk about Emily Dawson. Let's talk about decency. The post spread like wildfire. Catch justice. 4. Emily started trending by noon. News stations picked it up before evening. Emily, meanwhile, sat alone on her apartment floor. Sorting through a box of expired medical gloves she thought she could donate somewhere. Her phone lit up again. Another unknown number, then another. The missed call count climbed past 300. She had no idea that somewhere out there, the man she'd helped had just reminded the world who he used to be and who she had chosen to be when no one else would. The sound began as a murmur, a deep mechanical purr that stirred the morning air like a coming storm. Emily paused at the kitchen sink, her hands still wet, the sponge slipping from her fingers into the dishwater. She hadn't slept much since the termination. The past 3 days had been a blur of silence, job rejections, and unopened text messages from friends who meant well but didn't really understand. But this sound, this wasn't traffic. It wasn't the trash truck or some city protest. It was intentional, rhythmic, like something was approaching in unison. The floorboards beneath her bare feet trembled faintly. She walked to the front door with a strange tightness in her chest, the kind that comes before either something beautiful or something awful. She pulled it open slowly and froze. The narrow street outside her modest row house was flooded with people. They lined the sidewalk shoulder to shoulder, overflowing into the street. Some stood with hands over hearts. Others clutched signs or American flags. A cluster of nurses still in their scrubs stood beside a line of weathered firefighters in turnout gear. Veterans in full dress uniform stood at perfect attention. And further back, rumbling slowly forward, were rows of motorcycles, glinting chrome and roaring engines, flanked by semis and pickup trucks like an improvised honor guard. The air was thick with something Emily couldn't name at first. It wasn't pity. It wasn't protest. It was gratitude. Raw, unapologetic, overwhelming gratitude. Samuel stepped forward from the crowd, standing taller than she'd seen him that night at the bus stop. His beard was trimmed, face clean, eyes sharp. He wore a new overcoat, cheap, probably donated, but pressed and dignified. In his gloved hands, he held a folded American flag, crisp and ceremonial. He looked her square in the eyes. "This is from all of us," he said, his voice carrying. "You didn't just give me a blanket. You gave me back my dignity." Emily's breath caught. Around her, the crowd erupted into applause. Not polite, not restrained, but thunderous, cathartic. Bagpipes began to play. mournful and proud. A snare drum joined, then a trumpet. People began stepping forward, one after another. A little girl handed Emily a handmade card and a cupcake with a single candle burning bright against the winter chill. A trucker pressed a note into her palm. Another woman hugged her and whispered, "You helped my brother. He was out there too." Then came Congressman Langston, hands in his coat pockets, eyes damp. He hugged her tightly, no cameras, no speeches. "You reminded the country what compassion looks like," he whispered. "Now let us do the rest." Emily blinked hard against the tears. For the first time in days, her hands weren't shaking. She stood taller, not because she wanted to, but because they needed her to. Because in a world that had forgotten what quiet courage looked like, she'd been seen and remembered. The house was quiet, but not in the lonely way it had been 3 weeks earlier. Now, the silence was warm, purposeful, punctuated by the low hum of her laptop and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen where Samuel was washing up, humming a tune only Marines would recognize. Emily sat at the dining table, surrounded by opened letters, stacks of envelopes, and a corkboard covered in logistics, maps, names, supply routes. She wasn't wearing scrubs anymore, just jeans and a hoodie bearing the logo of the nonprofit she now led, Echo Med Outreach. She hadn't returned to the hospital. The building that once defined her no longer felt like home. What she had now was different, messier, less predictable, but alive. Every morning began not with charts and shift rotations, but with calls from veterans' shelters, texts from community centers, updates on donations from strangers across the country. The program had grown fast, faster than she'd expected. Within days of the parade, she'd received a call from the founder of a national nonprofit. "We've got the funding," he said. "You've got the fire. Let's do something real." They handed her the reins, without conditions. No bureaucratic layers, no sterile meetings, just trust. Samuel was her first volunteer. He arrived early every day, coffee in hand, beard trimmed, sleeves rolled up. "I'm not the guy I was on that bench," he told her one morning, "but I think I'm finally the guy I was meant to be." He organized supply runs, coordinated with shelters, and spoke at community events. When he spoke, people listened, not because he was polished, but because he was raw, real. Letters poured in from every corner of the country. A family in Nebraska sent 50 handmade blankets. A church in Ohio converted its basement into a drop-in clinic. A retired nurse in Georgia offered to staff a mobile unit. One man wrote, "I've driven past the same homeless vet for 2 years. Yesterday, I bought him lunch. Thank you for waking me up." In every interview, Emily deflected the spotlight. "It's not about me," she said, over and over. "It's about remembering people like Samuel, remembering that they were never meant to be invisible." But the world didn't see it that way. To them, Emily Dawson had become a symbol of what compassion could look like in a cold world. A nurse who lost her job but found her calling. A stranger who gave away a blanket and unknowingly ignited something far larger than herself. She was living proof that one moment of grace, given without expectation, could ripple outward and shift an entire narrative, and that sometimes the forgotten, those sitting on cold benches in the dark, don't just survive, they come back, and when they do, they change everything.